Good evening and welcome to Bush Hall here in Shepherd's Bush. Welcome to those of you in attendance in the room and welcome to everybody joining us live on YouTube and Facebook Live. It's a real privilege to be here this evening to be able to share with you the announcement and the reveal of Dorico. My name is Daniel Spreadbury. I am the Product Marketing Manager for Dorico at Steinberg, and I will be hopefully showing you the software a little bit later on tonight. But we are going to start our event this evening with a premiere of a new work that we have commissioned in Dorico from composer Thomas Hewitt on piano, along with the string quartet Ensemble Perpetuo. This is Doric Overture. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome up on stage the composer of that fantastic piece, Thomas Hewitt Jones.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much.
So it was amazing to hear that played live. Obviously, I've heard it played by Dorico a few times over the last few weeks, but to hear it performed live is really amazing.
Thank you. It was quite an energetic piece in the end, actually.
Yes, the brief we gave you was basically upbeat.
That's right, that's right.
And I think you certainly got the brief.
That's right. Well, it's funny because when you demonstrated the software to me the first time, a couple of months ago now, in an early version, I was trying to look for ways of using the software's unique features to write something slightly different, slightly new. And one particular feature that really struck me was the ability of Dorico to rebar instantly when you enter a new time signature. In the past, I'm sure all composers will agree with me that you had to effectively create a bar and then fill that bar. But now we can just think in motifs and think horizontally rather than vertically. And that, for me, is a massive plus. You know, to be able to have that ability is really special.
Yeah, and you sent me an early sketch of just the original motif. It was sort of 30 seconds long, and I played it and thought, yeah, this is very exciting. That all came from just this ability to simply write a motif the way you like, and then, as you say, bar it and then develop it and change it in a way that is actually flexible and free.
That's right, and I thought the players were going to kill me when they came here to rehearse it today, but actually it all came together really nicely because they were really good. Ensemble Perpetuo did a really good job. But actually, yeah, so I suppose I was trying to look into ways of using the software in a slightly different way, and yeah, Dorico provides a lot of new features for composers.
And when you started working on the piece, I remember you emailed me, and you were actually on an aeroplane at the time.
That's right, and I'm actually off on one tomorrow again with my lyricist Mick, who's here tonight, who actually came up with the title Dorico Overture, so I have to credit him for that. Yeah. But we're going off to Australia to finish a musical, and I'm going to use Dorico entirely for this show. One feature I said to you earlier I didn't actually use writing this piece was the flows. The idea you can create a separate area of the project for different movements or different parts of the piece. So I'm going to really look forward to writing an entire musical in one window for the first time ever. So
and one of the things we were trying to do when we designed Dorico's interface was make it possible to use just on a laptop with nothing else, and so you were able to do some work on an airplane and just crammed in.
Yes, quite. Yes, I have to confess actually, I did this entirely on a MacBook like yours, and without a keyboard. Actually, I just used the laptop keyboard. Having the durations of notes along the top, which I'm sure you'll cover later, is a really fantastic feature for me. I mean, I used to enjoy, with another software we don't talk about, along the top. And having that back and not having to worry about the endless numeric keypad problem, having to type or set a custom key, what do you call it, a key... Key shortcut. In order to capture all those number keypad buttons on your laptop keyboard. Now it's not necessarily more because you've made it so concise, and I really will thank you for that.
So obviously we were giving you new builds of Dorico as we were coming towards. You needed to get the parts to the players.
Yes, it's rather exciting. I said to Daniel, we need to do some parts now. I was like, okay. Yes. new build coming tomorrow.
Yes.
And there was one point where what was the articulations weren't quite there. Yeah. Do you know, it's amazing because having seen it develop so quickly, and what really impresses me about the software is that the engine inside it, the notation engine, is amazing. It is unparalleled. Composers spend a lot of time, I'm sure a lot of people in this room will agree, composers spend a lot of time programming samples and trying to prove to directors that it's going to sound like that in the end. This software means you can actually write music and not worry about how it looks, because the edit window, the write window, the engrave window, they're all completely separate, and they enable you to just write music, and the software will format it beautifully. The parts, which I'm looking at now, I didn't touch them at all. I just pressed parts, or I pressed save to PDF or whatever I did. And they are, I can't even remember
That's
that.
what you did, yes.
But they literally were untouched. I didn't alter a thing, and the players seemed vaguely happy with them, so I think we're onto something.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you say a little bit more about what the actual process was of working on Dorico Overture? Did you kind of do it all at the computer? Were you at the piano? How did you do it?
I actually wrote it entirely at the computer. So I was on my plane and I was messing about with motifs. The whole musical work comes from this dum-ba-da-dum-bum-ba-dum-ba-dum motif, and that is taken through this process, and it was a kind of, I guess, a sort of organic process of what can Dorico do. I'm going to write a little motif and then see how I can extend it and then put bars in later. So all the bar lines, and it changes basically every bar, all came later. So I literally just wrote a long straight line and just saw what the software was capable of. The slow bit is motivically it's derived from the first bar effectively, but actually that was a more of a lullaby sort of area. I think I probably put a time signature in and just wrote for a while there, but it all came back to the crazy time signatures in the end.
And so. we sprung a surprise on you as well, didn't we, about 2 weeks ago, that there was actually a piano here that you
yes,
could
indeed.
play.
There wasn't a piano in the original one, it was just this, and then I sort of added something in. So
yeah, but I mean, it really adds something to the piece, I think, and it's lovely to have you playing it too.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So you're off to Australia tomorrow, working on a musical.
That's right.
And it's already sort of somewhat written, but you're going to do.
We've written about 3/4 of it. We've sort of scored it throughout, but actually it does need to. With a musical, it takes about 10 years to develop something. Well, it can do up to 10 years, and you have to really keep going back, keep rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and eventually you have something which has emotional impact and narrative, and hopefully stylistically works within itself. So you have to really collaborate, and I think to have an opportunity to start fresh, as it were, with stuff that's half written, but put it into a new piece of software and develop it, will probably make our musical a little bit better in the end. So.
That's very nice of you to say so. So you're going to be working on the musical, and you've also got a new. I'm going to plug your book and your CD that came out last week.
Oh, you're terribly kind. You don't have to do this. So I have a single coming out called Christmas Party,
yes.
which is a violin concerto on Christmas themes from my brother, who I think is in the audience, and the Royal Ballet Sinfonia, and they recorded it recently. It was written on another music software we don't mention that, but it is a lot of fun, and essentially it's trying to. I don't know about other composers in this room, but I like writing music that hopefully appeals to people on different levels, and hopefully musicians can enjoy it as well, so always giving a slight challenge to people on some level, hopefully.
Well, thank you so much for writing Doric Overture for us and for speaking so nicely about the software. It's very kind of you.
Very much.
And we're delighted to have been able to commission the piece from you, and I love it.
So thank you. It was a pleasure.
Much.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Daniel. All
Thomas.
the best. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
So I suppose I should show you the software, really. So that's what we'll do. But before I do, I would just like to just sort of frame the software a little bit. Obviously, we've been very open about the development of the software through the whole time that we've been working on it. Many of my colleagues are sitting down here at the front, and they've all done incredible work on Dorico over the last very nearly 4 years. It's almost exactly 4 years since we joined Steinberg. And it's been an incredible experience for us to have the opportunity to go back absolutely to first principles, and to have the support of Steinberg, who literally put no restrictions on us except for some expectation about when we might ship something, about what it should do and how it should do it. They said, "You're the experts. We're hiring you because you're the experts, so go away and build it." And to have that opportunity and that freedom and the trust that they've shown in us to allow us to do it has really been an incredible once-in-a-career opportunity, and we hope that the fruits of our labours will appeal to you all, and really sort of show a new way of working with music notation. There are three main things that we really set out to achieve with Dorico when we sat down. And when we sat down in London 4 years ago, we had no computers. It was just at the time 12 of us and some pads of paper and some whiteboards, and we basically spent the first 2 or 3 months really dreaming up the vision of what Dorico would become. Of course, we had no idea at the time it would be called Dorico or anything like that, but we sat and we dreamed this thing up. And I'm really happy to say that what we've got now, 4 years on, really does embody the vision that we set out with at the beginning of the process. And I think that it's because we, hopefully, all of us ourselves are musicians, and also because we've been working for so long in the field, we have a pretty good understanding of what the problems are and what the difficulties are, and hopefully these three things that we've identified that we've hopefully addressed in Dorico will actually really make a tangible difference to how you use music notation software and what you can use it for. So the first thing we wanted to achieve was that it had to be possible to compose into the software. And it's great to hear Thomas say that he was able to compose Dorico Overture directly into Dorico. That's really what we want to achieve. I think that existing scoring software is a wonderful way of taking existing music and putting it into the computer. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do that. And you know, existing scoring programs can do that to a great level of graphical sort of fidelity and so on. But the thing that they really lack is the ability to actually use them as a composing tool, because composition is not a clean process. I suspect even if you're Mozart, it's not a completely clean process. You come up with ideas, you want to extend them, you want to change them, you want to lengthen them, shorten them, transpose them. All of these operations, which of course are quite natural to do in a non-scoring bit of software like a sequencer, like Cubase or something, they're actually quite difficult to do in most scoring software. And so what we really wanted to do was rethink the entire area from the ground up so that you could literally sit down at Dorico and compose into it without feeling the restrictions that the program is working against you and that you changing your mind has any cost associated with it. Really, in Dorico, everything can be everything. You can change your mind about everything, and the software will respond to you and work with you rather than working against you. And the way that we've achieved that is by having a totally different way of thinking about music. I mean, actually, it's the way that we all as humans think about music, but it's a way that is sort of, in some ways, inconvenient for a computer to think about music. It's very convenient for a computer to think about music as being neatly hierarchical and very rigidly structured. But in fact, music is messy, and we need our representation of music to be able to be messy in order to actually accommodate the compositional process. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean things like the fact that bars in most scoring software have to be a certain length, and you have to, as Thomas says, fill them up. And then if you need to unfill them again, you actually have a load of work to do. If you decide to rebar your music or change the time signature, then you have a whole load of work to do to clean up the notational decisions that the software has made for you or that you have made in conjunction with the software. With Dorico, it can actually work with you hand in hand and make those decisions again for you in a way that leaves the music always looking clear, always looking correct in terms of its metrical sort of layout and so on, so that it's still communicating clearly to the musician. And we do this by effectively having streams of music onto which bars are imposed at a later date. So, as Thomas says, you really can write the music in without ever putting in a bar line and then stick them all in at the end, and everything will be as if you'd put them in at the beginning. It's really very clever. The second thing that we wanted to do is really make the graphics that Dorico produces, the graphical output, as fine as we possibly could. We really see our role as tool makers in this continuum of tradition and craft that goes back more than 400 years to the beginnings of music printing in Europe in sort of the early part of the 16th century. And that's a tradition that has been handed down by master craftsmen to their apprentices, and an incredibly long process to become good at doing it. And there are thousands of details that go into producing a beautiful page of music. And I think when viewed in the continuum of hundreds of years of this craft that's been developed, conventions that have been developed, computer engraving, which, you know, really in anger covers sort of the last 25 to 30 years, is just a blip in that continuum. And so we have tried to kind of ignore computer engraving when we've designed Dorico. We've tried instead to go back to the traditions, to go back to the craft of music engraving, and to try and find ways of yes, doing it algorithmically, but finding ways of producing music that has the same balance and proportion as music that is produced by an experienced human engraver. And we wouldn't ever say that we could replace an experienced human engraver. Music is simply too messy for that to be possible. But what we can do is take you a lot closer to the results that you would get if you had an experienced human engraver working by your side saying, no, don't do that, with Dorico than you do with any other program. And the third thing, of course, is that because we are part of Steinberg, and Steinberg is a company with a tremendous legacy, and not just a legacy, they continue to innovate in audio technology today, we wanted to make sure that it sounds great as well. And so at the heart of Dorico is the audio engine that is at the heart also of Cubase and Nuendo, our high-end digital audio workstations. And because we've got this rock-solid audio engine at the heart of Dorico, this provides a foundation for us to be able to build a whole new set of workflows that is really, hopefully, unique to scoring software that will allow you to produce not only a beautiful printed score, but also a really fantastic audible result as well, with familiar tools that you would be used to in sequencers and digital audio workstations, and of course all of the great virtual instruments and a proper audio mixer and all these things, which really are a new approach to sort of making an end-to-end job, you know. We're using Dorico because we want real musicians to play our music just as Ensemble Perpetuo have done this evening. And it's fantastic that you can still get some music out on paper, and hopefully Dorico does a better than ever job, better than any other program of getting that music onto paper. But of course you also need to be able to produce something that you can play to somebody when you don't have the live musicians on hand yet, or perhaps to persuade them that you should have the live musicians on hand. And so Dorico hopefully is starting to take steps in that area as well. And I would say that of the three goals, that is the one that we're sort of only at the beginning of. I think that with the others we've already achieved a great deal. And with playback, I think what we have is a real strong foundation that will really allow us to do incredible things as the software matures. So I think that's enough blathering from me up here, so instead I will sit down and blather some more while I look at the software instead. So I'm going to, rather foolishly I think, try to input some music live into Dorico here and talk at the same time, and multitasking is not perhaps my best quality, so we'll see how we get on. So I'm just going to start with a solo piano template, and straight away you see that Dorico's user interface is very uncluttered. We've tried our very best, of course, because music is the reason we're using the software, so as much of the screen as possible is given over to music. And we did design it really with a laptop in mind, which is not to say that it doesn't also work really well if you have huge studio displays and what have you in your home studio, but we really wanted to make sure that you could comfortably use Dorico with nothing more than a laptop and its keyboard. And to that end, not only as Thomas alluded to, have we made sure that pretty much everything you can do with the program you can do with just the keys on your laptop's keyboard, but also we've arranged the user interface in such a way that it's comfortable to work with on a single screen, but expands out if you've got more screen real estate available. So the application is basically built around the main music area in the middle, and then panels on all sides. So we have the toolbar at the top, and you can hide all of these independently. We have the left-hand panel, which in write mode is the notes panel, where you get all of the basic note input tools, and I'll be using that in a moment. On the right-hand side, you have the object creation panels, where all of the other notations can be found. But again, you can create all of these just with the keyboard. You don't actually need to use the mouse at all. And in fact, one of the things that makes Dorico really fast and efficient is if you take the time to learn all of the keyboard shortcuts, you can really fly through your input in a way that I think is unique among graphical scoring programs. And of course, the other thing is that along this toolbar at the top here, you've got the main 5 buttons that show you the 5 modes of the program. And we'll look at all of these modes to some degree over the next little while, but I'm going to start in write mode because really, you know, the main thing is to put some notes in. So let's look at the music in the middle of the screen here. You can see that, if I zoom in a bit, there's just one beat. So we've got a single flow, and a flow is basically just a piece of music within your project, and you can have as many of them as you like. And the reason we chose the term flow is that it doesn't really sort of have any particular connotations of scale, i.e. length, or of what type of music you might write, and we don't really have any judgment about that at all. One of the examples I'll show you later on tonight has a flow that is literally just 2 bars of music, but a flow could also be, as in Thomas's musical, a number, or it could be a sonata, or a movement of a sonata, or it could be a song in a songbook, or it could be an act of an opera, or it could be anything. It could be a scale in an exercise book, it could be a sight reading example, it could be a music example in an exam paper. The idea is literally that you can have any number of pieces of music within the same project, all with completely independent instrumentation, if you like, or they can have the same instrumentation, and then you can combine them in interesting ways. For now, we'll just start with our single flow, and it's, as you can see, it's for piano. To start note input, all I have to do is simply double-click where I want to start inputting, and you see this orange line, which is called the caret. It's not called the caret because it's orange, but perhaps we could have done that. And the caret is the insertion point. This is where the music is going to go. And I could click with the mouse. If I hover over the score with the mouse, I get a shadow note. But in fact, I'm not going to use mouse input, so I'm just going to turn on the selection tool there, which actually disables mouse input, and that way I won't accidentally put in notes in with the mouse. But now I can either use my MIDI keyboard, or I can use my computer keyboard. I'm going to use the MIDI keyboard. I'm not sure what octave it's in. It's one of these mini ones, so let's see if this is the right octave. Now, to actually put a note in, of course, all I have to do is press a note or a chord on the keyboard, or type the letter name on A to G on the computer keyboard. But of course, I need to choose the duration as well. So the panel down the left-hand side here has all the note durations, also the 3 basic accidentals, though more exciting ones can be found on the right-hand side. It has slurs, and then it has the 8 articulations, which Dorico rather narrowly defines articulations as being the ones that are common to all instruments. Everything else that you might think of as an articulation from other scoring programs, we call a playing technique, and they're found over here on the right-hand side, and there's gazillions of them, sort of 200 and something, a lot anyway. But we won't worry about those for now either, we don't need those yet. So to actually choose the duration, I use the number keys along the top row of the keyboard. So 6 is crotchet or quarter note, 5 is quaver or eighth note, 7 is minim or half note, and so on. And it goes basically from 1 up to 9 for a breve or a double whole note. And then the 3 remaining keys on the top row of the keyboard, which are 0, minus, and equals, although equals also has plus on it, are respectively natural, 0, natural, minus, flat, and equals, it's got the plus on it, sharp. So it's they sort of work as mnemonics for how to remember those shortcuts. And then the articulations are done with the keys to the left of the return key. They're not particularly easy to remember because, for example, staccato is right bracket. That's not massively memorable. But the thing is that they're very convenient to type. They're all located nicely under the right hand. And in fact, the way it sort of works if you're using the computer keyboard is that you do durations and pitches with your left hand, and accidentals and articulations with your right hand, and it actually works quite well. You can sort of touch type the music that way. So anyway, enough. Type some music in. Let's do this. So, okay, I pressed breve, but I meant to press crotchet, and I am in the right octave. Hooray. Now, you will recognize this piece fairly quickly. Notice I'm not putting in a time signature or a key signature as well. So the enharmonic spelling might be interesting at times. One of the challenges of playing in music from a MIDI keyboard is that, of course, you only have one key for D sharp and E flat, and so the program has to kind of make a best guess about what the note spelling should be, and it isn't necessarily always going to make the perfect example. Case in point, here we have C natural, when in fact I'm going to want to have a B sharp there, so let's fix that while I'm here. So to fix it, all I have to do is simply select that note, and then just as you can choose the accidentals with the keys at the right-hand side of the number row, you can also respell notes with the same keys. So you hold Alt and press minus, and that then respells using the note below. So now I get my B sharp. Now you might be saying, he's got the rhythm wrong if you recognize the piece already. Don't worry, that's all. There's method in my madness, but we'll come to the rhythm in a moment. So I'm just going to type in a couple more bars. Let's get up an octave here. I have practiced this to try and make sure that I would do it reasonably fluently. We'll see if I can manage it. I'm just going to type a few more bars. Here's another place where we'll get an incorrect enharmonic spelling. So again, we simply select that note and do Alt minus, and it goes in as it should. And then we'll just do another thing. I won't do the whole piece now. I just want to get as far as, in fact, I'll do it this way as well, just to make some more mistakes, and then I can fix them all. Okay, so you might recognize the melody if you're reading all that music. Obviously there are some rhythmic errors, and it's in the wrong key, and so on and so forth. So let's fix all of those things rapidly. So notes we've talked about, A to G or Prelay MIDI keyboard, number keys for durations, naught, minus, and equals for accidentals. What about other notations? So if I wanted to put in a time signature, for example, then everything that isn't notes goes in with shift and an easy-to-remember letter. Now, because there's lots of things that begin with T, there's tempo, for example, and there's time signatures. Time signature is actually M for meter. So you just press shift M. So everything that isn't a note is shift plus the letter that's easy to remember. And in this case, we want 3/4 with a 1-beat upbeat. Now, I could do this with the mouse on the right-hand side, but I prefer to do it with the keyboard. I type 3/4, comma 1. The comma 1 tells it that I want an upbeat, and then immediately it puts it all in, and you can see now that's starting to look like sort of correct, but obviously I've got some rhythmic errors in there. Let's also switch into galley view as well. So there's 2 view types in Dorico that you can switch between at any time. There's page view, which lays the music out as if it would be printed. And then there's galley view, which lays it all out on a single system that sort of grows as it needs to. So the next thing I need to do is fix these rhythmic errors I've made. So here's a fun thing you can do. I can click on the beam that selects all notes under the beam, which is nice, and then to make that the correct dotted rhythm, all I have to do is just press the dot key. And the nice thing is that it won't actually overwrite that second note, it'll just shorten it. So that's a very nice and quick way of taking notes. And the thing is that if you imagine you were writing something that is full of dotted rhythms, it's actually quite time-consuming when using step input to be switching back and forth between the dotted and undotted durations. And the neat thing about this is you don't have to. You can simply put them all in as equal durations, then select all of them in one go, press the dot, and because it will cleverly work out that the second note should be shortened and not dotted, it will actually give you the right result all the way through. So that saves quite a lot of time. Now this one is also not quite right. In fact, I can't use the beam there because I don't want to make those second ones dotted as well. So I'll make a marquee selection around those notes and dot them like that. Now these should have been crotchets, of course, or quarter notes. So if I select them, now here's another unique thing that Dorico has that other programs don't, and this is insert mode. So to engage insert mode, perhaps you get no prizes for guessing this, you just press I, and you see on the left-hand side here in the toolbox, the insert button comes on. Now what the insert button does is it means that now any edits that I make or any music that I input at the position I'm at will actually move the other music along. It'll kind of push it out or pull it back. Now in this case, if I'm editing music and I want to make both of these notes into crotchets or quarter notes, then I want the rest of the music, not that there's very much of it, but I want the rest of the music to budge along automatically. So all I have to do to turn those into crotchets now that I've put insert mode on is simply press 6, and you see that then everything moves across. And notice how that tied pair of quarter notes or crotchets has now reconstituted itself into a half note or a minim on the other side of the bar line. And this is a very simple example of the kind of rhythmic flexibility that Dorico has. And in fact, you can do that with any music of any kind of complexity. Happens to be nice and simple to look at here. But if you were to be in the middle of a nested tuplet or goodness knows what, and you insert the music, Dorico will still sort it all out. Even if a tuplet ends up split over a bar line, when both halves of the tuplet end up on the same side of the bar line, it all just magically reconstitutes itself and looks correct at all times. So you probably do recognize this piece now. It's obviously a bit of Chopin. So let's just do a couple of other things while we're here. Key signature. So if Shift M is meter, then you can probably guess what key signature is. It's Shift K. And again, you get the little popover. And again, all you have to do is just think of how you would describe the key signature you want. I want A major, so I put in capital A. It is case sensitive because if you put in lowercase a, you get A minor, which kind of makes sense. I could also put in, say, for example, 3S for 3 sharps if I didn't really want to actually think and I was just copying something out. But of course, if you put in just 3 sharps, it doesn't know whether you're in A major or F sharp minor, so you have to sort of think about that. So there's our key signature. And now, of course, all of the accidentals that shouldn't be there have gone, so that's good. Let's do dynamics. Probably, again, no prizes for guessing what the shortcut for that might be. It's Shift D. And again, you get the popover, and the instruction that Chopin writes at the beginning of this one is piano dolce e semplice, and you put that in. Dorico does not yet white out the bar lines. We will do that at some point, but you can see that it automatically puts the formatting of the dynamic in correctly. I didn't have to learn any special shortcuts to hold down while I was doing it. So hopefully scores where you see dynamics written in just boring old Times italic will be a thing of the past with Dorico, because it's pretty much impossible to put in a dynamic that doesn't use the appropriate font, which will be very good indeed. The other thing, of course, it has is a tempo marking. So I've already given this one away. It's Shift T for tempo, and I'm just going to type in andantino, which is the tempo that Chopin marks. And notice how it's automatically aligned correctly with the time signature. You never need to worry about that kind of stuff. If there wasn't a time signature there, it would be correctly aligned with the first rhythmic beat in the bar instead. So all of these things basically you don't need to worry about. And in fact, it's worth just dwelling for a moment on the dynamic as well. Dynamics in Dorico are optically centered on the note heads. So each dynamic, we've worked out not just its actual physical center point, but where is the balance of the symbol, whether it's 3 Ps or 6 Fs or whatever it might be. Where is the balance of that? Where does it look right when it's underneath a note head or a chord? And so it actually uses an optical centering that you'll eventually be able to adjust if you want to try and always make sure that everything is balanced and just where it should be. I need to put in some other markings. I need a couple of slurs, for example. So slurs again, no prizes for guessing how to put in a slur. You simply press S. Select the note that you want the slur to start on and the note you want the slur to end on, and you press S. The reason you do it this way is that Dorico can actually have slurs that end on different staves or in different voices, and so you tell Dorico when you start where's the start of the slur, when's the end of the slur, and that way it can do appropriately, hopefully, clever things when you put it in. Of course, we also have a couple of other slurs here as well. Here's another fun thing. If I click on the stem of a note, that also selects all of the note heads on the stem as well, which is very convenient for sort of repitching and so on. Again, put in just these slurs. Like that. And you see that again, Dorico automatically chooses which side of the stave the slur should go on. The slurs automatically avoid collisions with things under themselves, and there are a myriad of rules to control slurs in just about every situation you could possibly imagine. Now, this little bit that I've just got to here actually introduces a second voice as well. So in Dorico, there is no limit on the number of voices you can have on the stave at the same time. Dorico will, it's not like they have to be paired up stem, down stem, and there's 4 of them or something like that. You can have as many of them as you need. And Dorico's algorithms for laying voices out will carefully work out which order to put them in. It will try and pair them up. It can even, in some cases, fit 3 into the same sort of horizontal slice of time. If, for example, you have very widely spaced voices, it can fit a 3rd one in the middle if it's got no stem, or even if sometimes it does have a stem, and then it'll sort of lay it all out. And it's pretty much impossible to have any collisions between notes in different voices in Dorico, which is pretty good, I think. So if I want to start a new voice, I'm going to turn insert mode off. You see the little chevrons on the top and bottom of the caret that indicate insert mode is on. I'll just show you what happens if insert mode is on. And if I put in a few more semiquavers, for example, you see what happens there. I'll just undo it again. See how Dorico still maintains that we're in 3/4, so it has to show each beat very clearly, even if the rhythm's a bit unlikely. And you probably would, want to think twice before you actually wrote that. But if you do decide to write it, Dorico will lay it out as clearly as possible within the constraints of the meter that you're working in. So I'll turn off insert mode, and I just want to start a new voice. So to start a new voice is Shift V for voice, which again doesn't really take any great powers to guess. And you see now that next to the caret there's a little plus sign, and the little note that's there, which you might have thought is indicating the duration. It's not actually, it's just indicating the direction of the voice, so the nominal stem direction of that voice. So I need a down stem voice here. I also need a minim or a half note, and I want to go, I'm in the wrong octave, of course I am. So that goes there. To transpose notes, by the way, unlike other programs where you use sort of left and right arrow to move the selection left and right, and then up and down to repitch the notes, in Dorico we wanted to make sure that you can never accidentally change the note if you didn't mean to. So the arrow keys on their own only ever move things, or they either move you around the score, and in fact they never change anything. If you want to change anything, you have to hold down the Alt key. So if I wanted to transpose that note up step by step, I'd hold down the Alt key and then the arrow keys. And if I want to go by octaves, then it's Control Alt or Command Alt on Mac, like that. And you can see that it, carefully moves things out the way. And this note, in fact, should be tied to another minim in the next bar, like that. And I put in that tie simply by pressing T in between the 2 notes. This note should also be tied here, like this. And that's the tie between voices. And again, you do it just the same way. Just like with slurs, you have to tell Dorico where you want it to start and where you want it to end. So you simply select those 2 notes and press T. Now in galley view, that doesn't put enough space in, but in page view, that will have enough space and it won't look like a silly little vertical line there. And again, notice one other thing here, and that's that when I select the tied note, I get the whole note. And that's because, as you can probably imagine, in fact, let's see what happens if I now insert some music here in this voice. So let's just insert, for example, another couple of crotchets. Firstly, notice how cleverly it keeps the tie in the same place. But notice that note is just one note. That tied note is a single note. Even though I put it in as two minims or half notes and I tied them together, it is one note inside Dorico. I can't now do something weird that would cause it to split up in some strange way. I can't, for example, if I make it a sharp, then it's, notice firstly, cautionary accidentals, of course, as well, and notice also how it can no longer be tied to the previous notes, it's no longer the same pitch. But notice how I didn't end up with a D natural on the second half of that tie. Also, if I put an accent on, notice I only get one at the start as well. It doesn't ever put one in halfway through a tie chain, this kind of thing. And in fact, Dorico knows the difference between articulations of attack and articulations of duration. It puts the articulations of duration at the end of a tie chain rather than the start automatically and things like that. Let's just undo some of those steps, get back where we were. Yes, okay. Just put the tie back in as well. Now, you see now that we have a rest here as well in our new voice. So when we created our new voice at this point, then Dorico helpfully padded that bar with a rest. And you don't have to hide rests or anything, Dorico. Instead, you can just simply say, where do I want this voice to begin? So I want that voice to begin only at the point at which that minim or that half note arrives. So all I have to do is go into the properties panel. So we haven't introduced the properties panel yet, so here it is. And the properties panel is a contextual sort of toolbox of options that, for example, if I select a rest, I'll see a different set of options. If I select a slur, I'll see a different set of options and so on. And this is sort of the second level of control. We're introducing the second level of control before the first, but never mind. And the second level of control allows you to change things on a case-by-case basis. So in this particular case, for example, I know that I want that note there to start that voice. So to achieve that, what I do is select the note, and then in the properties panel, switch on the starts voice option. And then you see that rest disappears. You don't have to hide that rest, and it won't sort of reappear at some later point. If I do some more edits, you're telling Dorico semantically this is where that voice begins, and that's just how it is. And likewise, there is actually another rest here in that second voice, in the second bar here, or bar 6 I suppose it is, but because it's coincident with the rest in the upstem voice, you don't see it. It is there, but you don't see it because they just get, as we say, glommed together. I don't think glommed is a real word, but that's what we call it when rests get splatted on top of each other. As you can see, there isn't really a good way of describing it, so glomming is what we call it. So that gives you a sort of easy sort of way into doing voices and so on. We need a hairpin at this point, in fact, or is it a little bit later? Well, let's stick the hairpin in here, Chopin won't mind. And so to put in a hairpin, again, you can do this in lots of different ways. If you're doing an outside of step time input, then the simplest way is to select where you want the hairpin to start and stop, and then you can just click it in like that, or you can do the shortcuts for hairpins are the keys with greater than and less than on the keyboard. So you just press shift comma for a crescendo and shift full stop for a diminuendo. And it's all, very, very easy to remember all of these things. Let me actually just open up one I did earlier, because I'm not going to make you sit through me typing in the entire of this Chopin, but I have typed it in already this evening in my rehearsal, so I'll open that up and you can see here the finished piece. It's got the left-hand stuff in it as well. There's the proper hairpin and so on. And so this is, might not believe me, but completely untweaked output. I mean, it's not a terribly challenging piece, but I haven't had to make any adjustments of any kind to this music. This is simply what you get if you type music in Dorico. And this is really where we can talk about how we've really got a huge commitment to making sure the graphical clarity of what Dorico produces is simply unparalleled. And we've tried to really address details that other programs just don't. For example, here's a little detail down here. If we zoom in on this chord in bar 12, have a look at the ledger lines here. In order to make sure that A sharp, the upper A sharp on A sharp 5, is aligned perfectly with the A sharp on A sharp 4, the ledger lines on the left-hand side of this chord are actually shortened automatically. And if there were other ledger lines that were a bit further down that didn't have an accidental, they would still be the normal length. But the ones that are kind of tucking in with an accidental, they get shortened. And you don't notice that, really. You don't notice it. But what you do notice is that chord just looks right. And I think that there are literally hundreds of details like that. I mean, there's quite a few just with ledger lines, to be honest. But across the whole of what the program can do notationally, we've never just stopped at the basics. We've always gone to try to get to the heart of what it is that makes that notation look right. And I think the thing about music engraving is that it can be very hard to articulate in total what it is that makes a page of music look right. But if you really do think about it a lot and study it a lot and really get into the details, you can sort of pin it down to thousands and thousands of details. And so what we've tried to do as we've been building Dorico is to put in as many of those details as we could to try to make sure that you always have a good level of graphical quality just simply by default without touching anything. And then when you want to touch stuff, then we have 3 levels of control to work on. So we're actually in setup mode now, but I've hidden all the panels. So let me just show them. So you can see that when you hide the panels, and in fact I can hide the top one as well, you have plenty of room for your music, even on a laptop screen. So I'll just bring the panels back. And that the shortcuts for the panels, by the way, to switch mode is Control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the panels are Control 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 0 hides all of them in one go. And I'll bring back the panel here at the bottom. So in this particular piece, obviously I've just got a piano, and I've got my single flow of Prelude number 7. But let's say I wanted to add Prelude number 8, which also happens to be an A major. So to actually start a new piece in Dorico, it's one click. In other scoring programs, you can't really do it. You can have the illusion of having multiple pieces of music inside the same file, but you probably have to go through between 10 and 12 steps to actually start a new piece of music. You have to, adjust the layout, adjust the bar numbers, put in different time signatures with a special option that you can't normally do. All these sorts of boring things that take a while. And in Dorico, it really is as simple as pressing the button once and in it comes. And I've actually switched on justification now because I wanted the last system of the first flow to reach the right-hand side of the page, but of course that now means that my one beat in flow 2 stretches out all the way across the page. But the fun thing is it'll fill in as I type the music in. Now, flow 2 is completely independent from flow 1, and we'll make it prelude number 8. I'm not going to type any of this in because it's much harder than prelude number 7, and I'll definitely make mistakes. But I will at least type in the title for it. And when I do that, you see it goes straight into the score. And if I want to show the composer name again, I can go into Project Info, and you've got a complete set of independent metadata for every flow in your project. So I can copy it, for example, from flow 7, which saves me typing those accents again, and then in it goes, and then it appears there. And we'll talk about the magic that makes that appear in a moment, because that's all done in engrave mode. But let's say that I perhaps unfairly to Mr. Chopin want to add a violin part to this prelude. So the way I would do that is by adding a player. So we've talked about flows, and the second of the three big concepts in setup mode is players. And players are just human beings. Because the idea about Dorico really is that you're doing this because it's going to be played by humans in the end on real instruments. The whole sort of top-level concept that you work with in setup mode is about actually preparing the music for performance with real human beings. And so rather than thinking about an instrument like a violin, well, an instrument can't do an awful lot on its own, really, unless violins have got a lot cleverer than I last looked. But I think they normally need a person to drive them. So with Dorico, you create a person and then give the person the violin. So there's two different types of people you can create. I suppose one of them's not really a kind of person because it's a group of people. There's solo players, which is an individual human, called Jim or whatever, and he can hold a violin, or he can perhaps hold a flute and a piccolo, or an oboe and a cor anglais. And the transition between different instruments are handled completely automatically by Dorico. You never have to sort of create an instrument change or anything like that. You simply type the music in for the flute, type the music in for the piccolo in galley view, where you can see both staves, and when you switch to page view, it's automatically worked out all the staff labeling, put any clef and transposition change in the right place, and everything is hunky-dory without you having to lift a finger. So let's add a solo player and give him a violin. I just simply click that little button down there. There's also keyboard shortcuts for all of this, of course, and then just type the name of the instrument I want. Now, at the moment, Dorico doesn't sort of default to a particular score order, but luckily it's extremely quick to just put things right. All I have to do is just drag the violin above the piano, and there he is. And all the bracketing's right. And in this particular case, we don't have any staff labels, but you could have them if you want to via the layout options. Now, of course, the violin is also now present in the second movement in the score as well. But let's say that I don't want the violin to play in the second movement. In other programs, you'd have to kind of do a bunch of stave hiding, and maybe then a subsequent edit, maybe like putting in a time signature, might cause that stave to be reshown again, and it can be a bit of extra work to sort of manage differences in instrumentation between different movements within the same work. So in Dorico, it's much, much easier. All you have to do is select that second flow. And when you select one of these panels in setup mode, you're sort of looking at the world through the lens of that type of thing. So when I click on flow, I'm now looking at the world through the lens of the flow. So I can see in flow number 2, by these checkboxes that are switched on here, the violin is included and the piano is included. So to remove the violin, all I have to do is untick him or her, and he or she disappears and is no longer involved in that piece. And in fact, if I then wanted to have a third flow that was going to be simply for solo violin, I could do the same thing in reverse. Again, select the flow, untick the piano, and now the violin is there. And they're really not there. They're not going to reappear at some weird point later on when I least expect it. You just set that up in setup mode, and Dorico just sort of knows that's how it should be. The third and final ingredient in setup mode is layouts. So layouts are how you bring together flows, which is the actual music, and players, which is the people holding the instruments that will play the music, into stuff that you can actually look at and edit and play back and so on. And so a layout is one of three types. There's full score layouts, which as you might expect contain all of the flows and all of the players by default. There's instrumental part layouts, which contain one player's instruments and all of the flows. And then there's a third kind that you can create for your own purposes. And again, unlike other scoring programs that have a sort of linked or dynamic parts feature, Dorico's parts feature is completely sort of, all of those layouts are on an equal footing with each other. So you won't find that making a change in one layout is going to unexpectedly make a different change in another one. Everything is independent. So if you want to have slurs pointing one direction in one layout and pointing another direction in another, that's fine. If you want to have slurs dashed in one layout and not in another, that's fine as well. And to the point where, in fact, there is no feature in Dorico for extracting individual layouts as separate files. You have to do it all in the same project. That's how sure we are that we've got it right in terms of the ability to actually have score and parts inside the same project. So to actually view the different layouts, then all you simply do is pull them down from the menu on the top there. And I'll just take a moment just to introduce a couple of the other windowing things that Dorico does, because we've tried to make it very flexible in terms of how you can sort of look at different things at the same time. So obviously you can have different windows onto the same project, but that's not much use on a laptop because I can only really look at one of them at once. But I can, for example, have multiple tabs. So if I press the new tab button, then I can choose to look at, say, the violin part. Here's a nice thing that other programs don't do: a tacit al fine automatically, because that multi-rest lasts to the end of the flow. The reason why, by the way, it's got the rest at the beginning is because that's an irregular bar, but we'll ignore that for now. Anyway, and if I then want to, for example, show two of them at once, I can split the window vertically. I can do vertical split, and then I can see the piano on one side and the violin on the other. So there's the violin, and here's the piano, and you just click on the one that you want to work on. And all of these things are saved. It remembers all of these settings for you, and when you come back to the project, everything is where you left it, which mode it's in, which tabs are open, and all that good stuff. So let's just close this tab for now, which I think I have to do by going to no split, and there we are. And in fact, I'll just go back to the full score as well, just for the time being. So yes, layouts are the way that you actually bring the music together into something you can then sort of print out and edit and so on. And I mentioned already there are 3 levels of control in Dorico, and options is the top level one. And there's 3 main options dialogues. Everything comes in threes. 3 options dialogues in Dorico, and the first of them is layout options, which allows you to control all of the settings that are specific to each layout. And what actual settings they are is kind of an interesting mixture, because there are things that you need to be able to vary per layout that you might not expect that you need to vary. So obviously you need to be able to vary things like page size and stave size and so on, and you can indeed vary those. You can also vary margins and all those sorts of things as well. But you can also, for example, vary things like the vertical spacing. So if you were doing a custom score layout, for example, you were doing a rehearsal score that was maybe from a larger work for orchestra and chorus, and then you want to produce a rehearsal score that is for just, say, chorus and a piano reduction, firstly, you can have that piano reduction as an instrument in your score, never appearing in your conductor's score, never sort of getting in the way, needing to be hidden and so on, because you can simply exclude it from the full score and have it only in the rehearsal score. But you might also then need to have different staff spacing values to make that score look right. So you can actually vary all of those gaps per layout. You can even change the note spacing per layout as well. So you can change the note spacing ratio, and also the default space for a crotchet or a quarter note and so on. Bar numbers are also completely independent, so all of these things. And you see that we've tried to make these dialogues fairly friendly. I think notation options and engraving options, which I'll show you in a moment, are friendlier still, and they're full of pictures to try and make it as easy as possible to navigate your way through the, as I say, literally hundreds of options that Dorico provides for making your music look just the way you want it to. And the nice thing about this is that it's actually modeless. So again, if I was working on a larger system with another monitor, I could stick that layout options dialog on another monitor, keep working on the score, and I can make changes in there and simply press apply when I want to make the changes, and I can see all of the layouts. I can change the options for multiple layouts at once. It's really a very convenient way of doing those sorts of changes. So I mentioned that there are 2 other options dialogues. Let's look at the one in write mode, which is notation options. Now, all of the stuff that Dorico does where it automatically changes the notation based on the edits that you make That's all governed by an engine under the hood that knows all about, metrical stuff, and knows not only about that for how to separate notes into tie chains and when to use dots and when not to and so on, but also beat grouping for rests and also beam grouping as well. And all of those have separate options. And you can see if I just slowly scroll down here. So for example, this is note grouping. So this is in simple time signatures with half bars, so things like 4/4 and so on, or 4/8. That's not right, is it? Yes, it is 4/8, of course, quavers, or eighth notes. You can choose between basically A or B, and so you can choose in any given musical situation how do you want it to be notated. And once you've set this up, perhaps you want to set this up for each movement inside your project, each flow, or maybe you actually want to set this up for all time. You want to say, well, no, I know how this should always be done, and it never ever is going to be different. You can press Save as Defaults, and then all future projects that you create will use your preferred settings. So just scrolling down here, you can see all these sorts of things, and then rhythm dots. How many rhythm dots do you want to be allowed in simple and compound time signatures? How do you want irregular bars to be filled up with notes? Do you want to be allowed to be a single note, or must it show the beat divisions? If it's 1 + 2 + 3, do you need to show that? How do you want syncopation to be handled? Dorico has quite sophisticated detection for syncopation, including where bits of the pattern are missing and rests are in their place, and what do you do when it crosses the half bar, and so on. And likewise, if you look at beam grouping, there's similar options for how do we handle 3/4? Do we want to beam in 6s or beam in 2s? What do we want to do when we've got tuplets that have the same rhythmic duration if they were unscaled as the notes to either side? Do we want to show a bracket and beam them together, or not show a bracket and not beam them together, and so on? And all of these, as I say, there are literally hundreds of options, and we've tried to present them in such a way that you can see what Dorico is going to do when you choose them. Here, for example, we've got voice ordering things, which is, quite a hotly debated topic in the world of music engraving. Very exciting people, of course, music engravers. We do enjoy all this stuff. And all of these different, you think I'm joking, but I'm not even really at all joking, in fact. So all of these different options are here for all of these sorts of things, and there's more of those in the engraving options dialog. And then for accidentals, for example, you can choose whether Dorico should follow the common practice that we're all used to, where an accidental alters a note only in the current octave and only in the current bar. And if you have it in another octave, then you're advised to kind of show a cautionary and so on. But it also allows you to have automatically the second Viennese school thing, where everything gets an accidental, including all the naturals and so on. And even this sort of modernist approach, which is sort of the worst of all possible worlds, really, where a note only gets an accidental, or rather a note that has an accidental only lasts for the note where the accidental is written, but you don't get any naturals to tell you what should happen later in the bar. And you can even make it even more confusing by doing things like saying, well, if it's inside the same beam group, then we don't have to restate the accidental. But so you can go crazy. If you want to reproduce the music of Les Six very precisely with exactly the crazy accidentals they did, then you can. Dorico has options for all that stuff. And lots of options for cautionary accidentals, which of course only work when using the sort of common practice style, because they don't really make sense in either of the other styles. But you can see just how comprehensive we've tried to be when we're dealing with all of these options. What do you do after a key change? Does a key change cancel an accidental in the previous bar? Or should you still show naturals just in case the musician didn't see the key change whizzing by as they were reading the music, and all this stuff? So lots and lots of options, and we've tried to make them as pretty as we can, so that I've blogged about this, and I'll say it again. When Elaine Gould's book Behind Bars came out about 5 years ago, the thing that I loved most about that book is that even if you're not quite sure where something is, all you have to do is flick through it. It's so beautifully and copiously illustrated that all you have to do is look for a picture that looks like the thing you're thinking about and then read around that bit. And so we really wanted to try and use that same approach inside Dorico to make the options intelligible. There are, I won't say my favourite option from another scoring programme that must not be mentioned, that isn't even a sentence, but we've tried to avoid anything that doesn't make any sense at all. If I go to engrave mode and show you engraving options, then you'll see the apotheosis of this, because this dialogue has, I'm not quite sure how many options in it, 450 or something crazy. So, for example, with accidentals, you can see all of the different choices for how far away should the accidentals be, when should they be aligned, when should they not. If you're crazy enough to write a chord like this, how do you want the accidentals to be stacked? It's a bit silly, really. But I promise that all of these came from a careful examination of the musical literature and of trying to make sure that, because there are as many engraving rules as there are engravers, and because every musical score presents a different set of challenges, we wanted to try and make Dorico the best fit tool for as wide a range of musical styles and idioms as we could. And, although we've worked very hard to hopefully choose defaults that make a lot of sense, and for common practice music, you just don't need to touch anything. And Thomas has already said that he didn't really touch anything at all when he was working on Dorico Overture. And, I think you'll agree that the musicians gave a tremendous accounting of that without really needing to touch any of the defaults. But if you want to get into all this stuff, you really can get into all this stuff to an almost ridiculous degree. So, for example, you can choose how many pauses should Dorico show if you've got pauses in multiple voices. And I think pauses are one of the really neat things that Dorico does, because in other programs you basically have to add one for every voice. And if you're working in a large-scale orchestral work, that means perhaps adding 40 or more pauses and making sure that you think exactly about where it's going to go, making sure you don't miss a stave. In Dorico, you simply put it in one place, and because we know that pauses apply to all of the instruments that are playing at the same sort of time signature and so on at the same time, it just puts them all in the right place, just works out where they goes and puts them in. So those are the sorts of things that we've taken the time to try and do to make sort of remove barriers that slow you down when you're working in software, and just sort of make it actually, I say this a lot, but make it like having an assistant by your side who says, oh yeah, right, I understand what you mean, and just does it for you. Now we're in engrave mode now, so let's have a little look at some of the things that engrave mode does. So, in fact, I'm going to open another score to show you engrave mode. I'm going to open this page. Now, one of the blogs that I really enjoy following is the blog that Henley Edition in Munich publish. And one of the posts that they did a little while ago that I really enjoyed was a post about how much text can a page of music stand. And so I set about reproducing the example that they had, which is here, in Dorico. And this page actually includes some text and some musical footnotes at the bottom. And I just wanted to sort of show you how engrave mode works and how you can do this very easily inside Dorico. Our goal with Dorico is to be able to do pretty much any arbitrary score layout, and we may not be able to do this completely yet, but the goal is absolutely that, if you're working in publishing, for example, you should be able to do the complete inners of your publications in Dorico without needing to be bounced out into Illustrator or InDesign or something. You should be able to do all of the typography, all of the music layout, any little funny things you might need to do with extra bits of music that need to be slotted in funny places. Our goal, and as I say, we may not be 100% there yet, is that you should be able to do all of that inside Dorico, so that in the end, you're only using your page layout program for your fancy color covers and so on. And so I set out to reproduce this page of Beethoven's sonata. And if I go into engrave mode, you can see sort of what's going on a bit. So if I zoom in, you can see there's green boxes, there's blue boxes, there's no purple boxes, but there could be a purple box, and that would be for graphics. But in fact, this music down here, which might otherwise be put in as a graphic in other scoring programs, that's actually a flow. So if we look at setup mode, you can see that we've got our sonata flow, and in fact, even clearer, if I show it to you in galley view, all of this other page shenanigans will run away. So there's our sonata, and there's that little snippet of music just lurking on the end there. And in fact, there's no time signature there. I just wrote those notes in, stuck the bar lines in where I wanted. It's very, very simple to do that. And the way that I then make sure that it doesn't mess up my page layout is I switch on this magical switch here, behind which hides all of the power and sophistication of Dorico's page layout engine. And it really is like, in approach, very much like InDesign. Another reason that we chose the word flows when we were describing the music that you put into your project in Dorico is because it flows into these frames. And in fact, this music is not, I haven't forced the formatting of this music at all. There's no system breaks or anything. All I've done is literally make the frame a little bit less tall, and the only other thing I had to change from the default settings in Dorico was the distance between systems, just to allow it to get a bit tighter. But as you can see, it does a pretty good job. That music is tight, but you can tell what belongs to what stave perfectly well, and get quite a lot of music crammed onto the page, just as the original edition crams quite a lot of music onto that page. So that's just the music from the first flow is in there, and the way that's achieved is that you have inside each music frame a flow filter, and so by default it shows all the flows, but if you want to, you can say, no, just show me the music from flow 1, or the music from flows 1 and 3, or 5 and 10, or whatever, and Dorico will then lay it out perfectly happily for you. So then I created these extra little music frames, and you can see that this music's a bit bigger than this music over here. So I'm going to put in a system break, then I can do that by just right-clicking. And I don't really need a system break, except that I need a way of telling it to change the staff size. And again, I go down to the properties panel here, and I specify a new staff size like that, and the music then shrinks, and there's the rest of the example. And maybe I just want to grab that frame and just move it up a bit, just to make sure that not that frame, and move it up a bit so that it sits there happily. And of course, you can probably guess by the fact that I did that with a system break that yes, you can change the staff size in Dorico at any system break to anything you like. And each stave within the system can be any percentage of the global size at that point, whether it's changed to the staff size, changed to the system break, or set in layout options. So Dorico's layout algorithms are really sophisticated, and you can do more or less anything you might need to do. Now, of course, with all these frames in the way, you can't really see what else is going on, but if I double click on one of these text frames, you'll see that this little palette pops up that gives you all of the controls that you might need for editing text. So Dorico has a complete system of hierarchical paragraph and character styles, just like in a page layout program. You can also, of course, override the font on a local basis. It has access to all of the font styles that the font family might have, even if that font is a big family with lots of different weights and so on. They'll all appear there. You've got size, stretch, baseline shift, character tracking, leading. You've got fully justified text inside text frames. You've got superscript, subscript. So it's really quite a complete set of tools already. It doesn't have things like spell checking or hyphenation, but you never know. We might add those in the future. And so it's very, very quick. And of course, you can copy and paste text in from other documents as well. And there's a complete system of dialogues that allows you to change all these things. You can edit all of these styles, and it's all very straightforward, and they can all inherit from each other, and you can really go bananas if you want to with all of those things. But you can see that I did this page of music in less than an hour at lunchtime today. Never say I don't prepare for these things. I did this today. But I literally didn't have to do anything apart from just type the music in. And I haven't changed anything about the spacing of this music or really anything at all. All I did was just make the frame a bit smaller. And I think we've got some printouts of this page down here on the table at the front, which you're very welcome to take away if you want to grab one. I think this is really an example. And again, this is not massively complex music, but this is the kind of thing that the program has to be able to do well. We've spent a huge amount of time working on the fundamentals to make sure that Dorico really does produce a beautiful result as much of the time as possible without you having to really do anything. What if you do want to do something? Well, you can, in engrave mode, get down to silly details. So, for example, let's look at a slur. When you click on a slur, of course, you get a familiar set of handles. You can navigate through the handles with the tab key. You can drag them, of course, with the mouse. You can just drag them and do what you like. You can also edit them numerically, and you can also edit them with the keyboard as well. And you can tab between them, and then that will change the height of the slur, and this will change that side of the slur, and so on. And in fact, slurs in Dorico are pretty neat because you can have not only S-shaped slurs, which big whoop, right? But you can, if you have a real burning desire to notate Le Tombeau de Couperin by Ravel, which includes a slur with something like 14 changes of direction, you can do that in Dorico as well. You can have as many segments in a slur as you like. So you can really, and then each of them has independent control of each segment, and the segments will stay in line. It's kind of a fun game. It's a bit like, because it's sort of slightly slippery. When you move one, another one moves in another way, and it takes quite a while to kind of shape a slur into the right shape, but it can be done directly inside Dorico without needing any external tools. So we've tried to really kind of go to the nth degree with all of these things, and you can just click on things and drag them around. Basically, you can do it with beams, you can do it with all sorts of stuff, and the idea is that you can get as down to the third level of control, basically, which is individual graphical tweaks. You can do all of that inside engrave mode. And if you get into a bit of a pickle and you want to undo something you've done, for example, obviously I could just undo, but with these beams I've mucked them up. I can just either individually remove a property. So one of the questions we've had during our beta testing is, why do you have all these buttons in the properties panel? Why can't I just set the property directly? And the answer is that you can actually there's a bit of added information here, and there's also a bit of added functionality as well. Rather than just showing you the current calculated value, we only show you a property when it's really set. And so that means that you can actually tell what's overridden and what's not. You can tell what's the default thing that Dorico is doing and what is your tweak. You simply select the item and then you can see what's happened. And it also then makes it very, very easy to simply unset something as well. You just switch off the switch. And if you don't want to go to the trouble of actually working out which switch it is you should switch off, so for example with this slur I edited that a bit, you can simply go reset appearance, which will undo things like the control points and so on, and then reset position, which will undo any changes that you've made to the actual position of the item. So for example, for beams, it would move them back into their default position and so on. So with these three levels of control, the global options, the properties panel, and then the ability to graphically tweak things, we again feel we've kind of got an idiom and a sort of a paradigm for how you should interact with the program that means that achieving the graphical result that you want is really, really easy and really fast, and the Dorico does a huge amount of it for you. It really does. I'm just going to open another fun file just to show you some of the other cool things that you can do with the page layout system. Here is a short bit of piano duet music by Ravel, and this is secondo primo, left hand, right hand, automatically done by Dorico. So the way that this is achieved is in engrave mode. So I haven't really mentioned master pages, but master pages are kind of the underlying thing underneath all this page layout stuff. Just like in a page layout program, you define a template effectively for how you want your music to look, and then the music flows into that template, and you can override the template if you need to. So in the case of this piano duet piece, what I've done is in the first page pair, and of course master pages always come in pairs because scores can be repaginated and they might be a left-hander or a right-hander. I've set it such that the left-hand page only contains piano 2, and the right-hand page only contains piano 1. And likewise on the default page, which is the sort of running page after the first page that doesn't have the title on it. And I said earlier on I'd tell you about the magic that meant that when I typed in Chopin into that dialog box it came up. Well, here is that magic. This rather peculiar and enigmatic string is going to be substituted by values that you type into project info, so you never need to, I mean you can override it and just type over the top if you want to, but the nice thing about the way that Dorico does it is that when you're on, for example, these default pages, here I've actually explicitly overridden it, so it's a secondo on the left-hand page and primo on the right-hand page, but by default it would just show you the running header of the title of the current flow that you're on. So all that business about making sure that the headers are correct on each subsequent page of the layout, you don't have to worry about that. And by default in a part, it just shows you the name of the instrument rather than the name of the movement. And of course you can combine these things freely and so on. So again, all I've done is I've just said on the left-hand page only can include piano 2, on the right-hand page only include piano 1, and then the result of that is that all I have to do to actually make the music work is put in the occasional system break. Because of course it actually flows the music for piano 2 and for piano 1 completely independently, and obviously piano 1 he's got a bit less to do for most of the time, so he would actually get much more music on that first page than piano 2 would, so you have to put a couple of system breaks in. But you can see that this is the kind of thing that simply would be impossible to do in other scoring programs. You would have to do this by looking at each primo and secondo part independently, then exporting them as graphics and putting them together in a page layout program. Well, with Dorico, you don't have to do that. So there's really a tremendous amount of power behind the page layout system that Dorico has. And I think we're really only scratching the surface of what's going to be possible with it too. So with the combination of being able to combine text and music and graphics, and of course the graphics you can bring in, they're all page relative, but you could position them on top of the music if you wanted to kind of have a graphical effect in the absence of any more dedicated graphical notation tools in Dorico as yet. And so all of these things together really give you a very complete set of tools for producing really professional page layout directly inside the scoring program. And we've done our best to make sure that if you don't care about any of that stuff, you just want it to look nice, you can just simply use the program with the defaults out of the box, and you will get a pleasing and consistent and balanced page layout on every single page of every score and every part that you produce. So I'm rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to make a quick accelerando here. Let's quickly talk about print mode and then we'll come back to play mode. So print mode, as the name might suggest, is where you actually take all your existing layouts and you either print them onto paper, how old-fashioned, or you export them as graphics so you can put them on your iPads or whatever it is that people do. It's encouraging to see proper paper on the stand here. But So again, in print mode, rather than the usual editable music view, the main central area is a print preview, and it shows you exactly what's going to happen when you print this out. So, for example, this one, you can see that page 1 is secondo, page 2 is primo, and so on. So I might, for example, want to put this onto. I have no printers installed, so it's going to be. It's not going to let me do it. Let's see what happens. Okay, it's still going to basically work. So I actually want to go like this. So now you can see that if I was to print this out on A3, then I would get each page on the right side. And the nice thing about print mode is that you can see here a little readout of how many pages is in each layout. So one of the time-consuming things about printing out, for example, a set of parts is working out, well, how many pages is each part, and then what strategy should I employ for printing it? Should I do it as spreads or 2-ups, or should I do it as single pages and then tape them? What should I do? And of course, experienced music librarians and people who do this have their own little rules about how they handle it. And so by expanding these cards in Dorico's print mode, you can immediately see at a glance, okay, well, that one's 8 pages and that one's 3 pages and so on. And then you can simply select the ones that are all the same on the left-hand side, set the options on the right-hand side. They're saved in the project for the next time you do it, and you can basically set up all of your layouts in one go, then select them all there, and then press print or export, and it'll churn through them and either produce a folder of PDF files, or it'll produce a decent stacked pile of paper on top of your printer. And it does some nice things that other programs don't do. For example, if you were printing a 3-page part, like this one here, the piano 1, unlikely you would print this one, but never mind. Oh, and by the way, notice multi-rest numbers in between the grand stave staves as well. But if you were going to print this out, then you might choose to print it 2-up, but then you would have on a large format piece of landscape paper, but then you don't really want another landscape piece of paper for the third and final page. So you can say, oh, well, I'll print the odd final page if I print this 2-up, for example, which is not going to let me do for whatever reason, because I've got no printer installed. Grr. Then you can say print the odd final page on portrait small format paper, either A4 or letter, and then it will just chuck that out the printer, and then you've got one less thing to guillotine and just tape it and it's done. So we've really tried to think about what's going to be practical in terms of getting the music out and onto paper. So I'm just going to close some of these scores, and then we can talk a little bit about play mode, which we've not even looked at yet. So the fourth and final mode in Dorico is play mode, and play mode doesn't look like any of the other modes, because what we've tried to do is, as I said earlier on when I introduced Dorico, is have some of the control that you would expect to find in a sequencer inside your scoring program directly. What shall I open? I'll open the Bartók. So here's a movement of Bartók's third string quartet when it comes up. That's the cello part of said thing. So let's look at the full score. And here it is. And again, no tweaking here. Notice the sophisticated time signature. Dorico has the richest support for time signatures of any application that I'm aware of. You can have alternating time signatures where each bar sort of cycles between two, like America, for example, which is obviously in 6/8/3/4, and Dorico will automatically beam in 6/8, beam in 3/4, beam in 6/8, beam in 3/4. It can do interchangeable time signatures where you have effectively a grab bag of time signatures, and then each subsequent bar is one of those time signatures, and maybe there's a pattern and maybe there's not. But it doesn't re-show the same time signature until the pattern is broken. It can do what we call aggregate time signatures, where you have effectively 2 time signatures within the same bar. So it might be, for example, 7/8 and 2/4, and you would see a little dashed division at the point between them. And you can do completely open meter. And because Dorico will allow you to put a system break literally anywhere, so for example, I could put a system break in the middle of this bar here. Apologies, Mr. Bartók. For some reason, this shortcut is not working, but here we go. And it works happily. And in fact, you could put a system break in the middle of a tuplet or in the middle of a nested tuplet if you want to. Dorico really tries to be as flexible as it can. And because it has rich support for open meter, it has to be able to put a page break or a system break anywhere, because that's just how the music works. There's no bar lines to go on, so it has to work. Anyway, let's have a look at play mode. So play mode looks like a sequencer, and it has a piano roll, and you can resize the piano roll, and you can scroll it, and you can scale it, and you can do all the things that you would hope to be able to do. And at the moment, the amount of interaction you can actually do with the piano roll is a little bit limited, but you can already, for example, adjust the durations of notes by clicking and dragging on the ends of them, and you see that if I do that, it's actually doing that in real time. And this allows you, for example, to take advantage of specific features in particular sound library, for example, that require the onsets and offsets of notes to be overlapped slightly in order to produce a legato sound, or whatever it might be. And that won't affect the notation at all. It will affect the played the played effect, but it will not affect the written notation at all. And Dorico comes with, of course, a whole suite of plugins. It's compatible with all VST3 plugins, which is the ones that come with Cubase, basically. So you have 30 effects processors, including an EQ, including a limiter, a compressor, including various things like amp simulation and so on. So you can actually genuinely mix inside Dorico. The mixer is not necessarily the prettiest thing, but it is very functional, and you can see here that it has all of the various sections are shown. If I scroll down, there are the faders, and each of the faders represents a different output from each plugin. So you're advised to use a multi-output plugin, because otherwise you won't really have any control over mixing if everything is played through a single stereo channel back into Dorico's engine. Here are the sends, and that's sending to the global effects channel, which is over here somewhere. And that has a reverb loaded on it, and here is one of my favorite things. I love the look of that button, isn't it nice? That's the reverence convolution reverb that's included with Dorico, and that's automatically instantiated on the output channel so that you get a nice reverb. And of course, it's got lots of impulses built in, so you could choose, for example, an Austrian concert hall, which is where I'll be on Thursday this week. Not that specific one, but a concert hall in Austria. And that changes the impulse response, of course, of the reverb, and then you can choose how much you want to send from each individual output to that, and so on. This is a 4-band EQ that's actually in the channel, and of course you can also instantiate and insert into any of the channels. So if you want a ping-pong delay, which I'm sure would sound excellent in Bartok, you can bring that in. But the point is really that you can genuinely do audio mixing inside Dorico. And so the aim here is to kind of move the line between when you need to stop working in your scoring program and when you need to start working in your sequencer. So, as I say, it's still at a very foundational stage in the initial release of Dorico. But with what we're planning to do is to expose all of the common MIDI editing tools that you would see in a sequencer, so things like editing tempo profiles and editing dynamics profiles and eventually editing controller profiles as well, so that you can actually get right down into the detail of fiddling with all of the playback parameters in a very detailed way. And you can use your own plugins as well, again to a limited extent in the first version that's available now. But where is Halion? Come to me, Halion. Are you going to appear? There we go. And Dorico comes with Halion Symphonic Orchestra, which is a sound library that Steinberg had recorded quite a while ago now, but it still sounds good. You know, the nice thing about samples is they may get old, but they still sound just as good because they're recorded well and played by good players and so on. And so it will automatically load all the sounds in Halion for you. And in the very first version that we're releasing tomorrow, it will play back tempo changes and play back dynamics and so on. And then as we will be rapidly improving playback in the coming months with a series of free updates, it will start to play back all the technique changes like, you know, pizzicato and differentiation between legato and spiccato and all the rest of it. And all of that will be done automatically just from reading the markings in the score. So if you're in write mode, then you can simply... Now, the audio wasn't working perfectly earlier, but let's see whether we get some playback. No. Okay, so it's not going through the HDMI, which is slightly a shame. But the playback is reasonably convincing, even in its fairly basic state. And certainly, for example, when I was listening to Thomas's piece when he first sent it through to me a couple of weeks ago, I was so excited to hear it played back by Dorico, even with its fairly rudimentary playback at this stage, because you can really, the sounds are good, and the excitement of the piece came through. So it's a good foundation for future development. But I think we will only build on it, and we know that these days, composers working, whatever field they're in, playback is more and more important, and being able to come up with a convincing virtual rendition of a piece of music is ever more important. And so the aim with Dorico, as I say, is to move the line at which you need to stop working in your scoring program and start working in your sequencer. And we have a lot of big plans that we will be working on in the coming months that are going to really sort of show our intention more. As I said in the introduction, I feel like in terms of Dorico's approach to handling input and editing of music, and in terms of our commitment to making the graphics as good as we can, I think you can already see the vision that we outlined when we were sitting around in that temporary office 4 years ago. I feel with playback that you have to kind of squint a little bit to see that, but I promise you it's coming, and we are going to transform the way that playback works inside a scoring program, and I think that is going to be extremely exciting for these kinds of workflows, and not only give you the control to be able to make the playback work really nicely by tweaking every detail, but also to give you a good out-of-the-box experience if, like me, you're a total muggins when it comes to editing MIDI and so on. So that is play mode, and I'm just going to open just a couple more pieces of music. We only have 5 minutes left before we're going to lose our live stream, but let me just show you a couple of other little things. So I haven't really talked much about tonality, but Dorico is trying to be as flexible with regard to tonality as it does to meter as well. So here, for example, is another bit of Bartok. Lucky that Bartok's just come out of copyright, really. And Microcosmos, of course, as you'll be well aware, uses a whole bunch of very interesting different sort of key signatures after a fashion to get the player to think about different sort of flavors of modality and so on. And so you can create these very easily in Dorico. There's a custom key signatures panel, and you can create them and define them in all sorts of crazy ways. You can define different microtonality. Dorico actually supports any arbitrary number of equal divisions of the octave. So if you wanted to do, for example, Turkish makam music, which uses 53 equal divisions of the octave, you can define the accidentals that are sort of 1/9 of a tone sharp and 4/9 of a tone sharp and so on. And this gets fairly nerdy fairly quickly, but you can do it in a relatively straightforward way. Certainly a more straightforward way than the one other graphical scoring program that has this feature at all. It's really quite simple to put that stuff in, and you can see that the other accidentals are sort of all down here, the ones that are defined in the current tonality system. So you can define a tonality system that outlines the number of divisions of the octave, how many steps there should be in those divisions between each diatonic step of the scale, then what each accidental would do in terms of the delta on the written pitch, and then any key signatures that use those accidentals as well. All of that can be set up, and then it can be reused in other projects as well. And you can see, again, nice little bit of Bartok, looks very, very nice, and everything is spaced very nicely. And I'll just open one final piece of Rager. And again, this is just to give you an idea of the graphical quality of Dorico with basically no tweaking. And yes, there's a slur leaping over a clef there, which isn't great. But here is a piece. Again, you can see the viola staff is smaller. We've got the tempo shown on both. And this is effectively default appearance of Dorico. So, you might come through here and you might see the odd thing that you want to change, but my point here is to demonstrate that it's pretty quick to make some of these changes. Some of these are to do with how Dorico thinks the stem directions of the voice are done, and this piece was actually imported from Music XML. So if you've got scores in other programs, for example in Sibelius or Finale, that you would like to bring into Dorico, I wouldn't recommend bringing a completed project over and expecting it to look the same, because our approach to Music XML import is actually to use it merely as a repository for the semantic musical information. So Dorico does its best work when you let all of its clever little engines do their jobs, and so we don't try to import every graphical detail of a Music XML file, instead just wanting to use it to bring the musical content across. But I think you can see from the way that this piece looks, which is not entirely straightforward and includes quite a lot of voices going together, hidden tuplets that show similes and so on, dynamics centered between the grand staves of the piano, and all of these things are done automatically by the program. It really is, I think, on a whole other level in terms of the graphical quality of what it produces by default. And all of us in the team are incredibly excited to see what now it can be in your hands, what you can all do with it. And with that, we have reached the end of the demonstration, and I would like to say thank you very much to the people who've been watching us from all around the world on YouTube and Facebook, and thank you very much for coming.